All right, folks, we're back. We're going to break down a few more shots from the short film that I just shot. This is day 2 of the short film, different location. We're at a motel for this one. Who doesn't love a good motel scene? It's always just so cinematic. Kind of hard to deal with though. The walls were kind of a yellowish color. The lamps in the room didn't work, so we had to pivot on this one. We couldn't totally just lean in to the vibes that were already there. The director picked this one because of the neon sign outside. Awesome green neon sign that we could kind of lean into, this kind of vibe that it was creating, this person trying to get away in this motel. So it really worked out for us, and that's why we picked this location. So this one was really a challenge for me, in that the director wanted this very surrealistic kind of look, and not something that I generally would gravitate towards. Not to say that one is better than the other, just not something that I generally would have done. And so this challenged me to just basically break all of my own rules.
Am I the only one around here who gives a shit about the rules?
You know, it's kind of nice to learn about cinematography, create a career, create a style, and then every once in a while press on that style, try something new, go out of the bounds that you're normally in. You can do this all over your life, but I thought this would be a good challenge for me to break those rules and see if I can make something look good, and not by going by my kind of usual formula for lighting. So I kind of appreciated what the director was asking from me, because it was something that I want to initially have gravitated towards making. And I want to say, okay, I can do this. I can do something different here. And the first thing that was asked was, can we lean into that green neon? I talked about this a little bit in the last video. We had a little bit of that green neon look coming through the windows in the bar scene. If you haven't watched the last video, that's part 1. You probably want to go watch that now before jumping into part 2 here. Either way, you're going to see some lighting breakdowns here, so stay if you want and go watch that one after this one. Here's what I'll say. I'm not saying that like color is bad in cinema by any means, but if you're pushing too much color into your scene and you're not using your general white balances like 5600, 3200, 4000, and staying in that scale, if you actually start to add a color hue to things, it starts to really mess with the skin. It starts to mess with contrast depending on where you're putting it. It gets confusing. It gets confusing like, well, that doesn't look like it should look. You start changing the colors in post and you're washing things out. It makes things much harder. But there's been some great films that have color in them, and they've done them in a way that really worked. So I knew I could take on the challenge. And so we'll kind of just start in the order that we shot these. We started with a gimbal shot outside. I lost my shit.
Oh no.
So you can't operate in bursts. But I was like, it's gonna be too hot. Devin, the director and actor in this, one of these shots where we're kind of following this character through the parking lot, showing off that green sign, establishing that we're at the motel, of course, and kind of walking with him to his hotel room. And this was all just a kind of a time of day thing. We wanted to shoot at blue hour, so we set up the Komodo this time instead of the Monstro, which I'm going to have some new stuff soon for the Monstro to be able to make it go on the Ronin RS4 Pro. But for this one, we just used the Komodo. I put the Thypoc 28mm wide open on that camera, and I'm kind of playing with this new gimbal rig, so this was kind of one of our first tests. I actually put my big brick battery in a little sling bag and ran that into the gimbal setup in the camera to just pull some of that battery weight off of my hands, and I was able just to walk with it with this kind of 2-handle small rig setup. Very simple, nothing to it. We used all natural light for this one. This was just a time of day planning and really just capturing the ambient light that was going on here. But it was a fun shot overall. You know, you're kind of trying to feel the lights that are on there, so we had some shadows here and there, but for the most part, how this is going to turn out, it's not going to be a big deal. But shooting at blue hour, although it's a very short window, you get some really beautiful stuff at blue hour because you're able to lean into some of the lights that are there and still have exposure on the rest of the scene and not have to worry about the sun going all the way down or having the harsh light from sunset. It just creates this really nice gradient in the sky and just looks really pretty. So that's really all we had to do for that one. Just the Komodo on the gimbal, real simple, but it looks really pretty. I really like the tonality that we get out of this, and it sets the mood for the rest of this part of the film. You got the neon sign, you got the Coke machine in the background, you got the lights coming from the underhang here, the little overhang. You got the little open sign. It's just a fun vibe overall. But then the next thing there was trying to match that with this kind of exterior scene where he's smoking a cigarette. So we did this in front of the same sign on the other side. So here's our main challenges, right? We want to sort of expose for those background practicals, right? Starting there, it's a kind of wide shot. You don't want to overlight something like this. Really, what I wanted to do is just augment a little bit of exposure on his skin, acting like one of the lights that was across the street, which there was one. There was a tungsten-ish balance light across the street. So, right, we look into that. the green neon's already hitting him, right? We're shooting at like a T2, T15 here. So we have plenty of light coming in. We're not really having to worry about not having enough exposure, but we want his skin to be lit. We want some intentionality there, but also making it look like we didn't put a light there, of course, kind of like what I was talking about in the last video. So very simple here, tubes are your friend. For narrative, I'm just really loving tubes because you just can put them in corners, you can put them on things, you can soften them really easily and bring them in, and they're really good for working in environments where you don't have a lot of power output and you can't run power to a location. Maybe you're out in the middle of nowhere, maybe you're in a car and you don't have the batteries to power something. You just turn on those tubes and they're battery powered. It's so easy to get things done. So that's all we did here. On a stand, very quickly, found the color temperature that we liked, and just made it to where it kissed. There was already some light coming in there, so we're just trying to kind of push more and even it out the way we wanted it to. I also tried something different here. Now, a lot of people that are new to the field may not know this, but if you hear about the new Red cameras, right? They have this new extended highlights mode, but Red's been doing this for a long time, and I think people forgot that, but there's a mode on the old cameras called HDRX, and I actually have that on the Monstro, and this was a chance for us to try it out, just to try to give a little bit more exposure to the Motel sign, while not having to change any of the other lights in the environment. So I'm gonna dive into this a little more, and I haven't figured out totally how to do it in Resolve yet, but what this does is it takes multiple exposures. It'll find your highlights, it'll change the shutter angle, and it'll make it where you can bring your highlights way down, and it's basically like a double exposure, and it'll blend the two images together so you can expose your skin where you want it and then reduce those highlights. It doesn't work in every scenario. You might get flicker if you're doing it this way, you might get some weird ghosting effect, but for something like this, it was just static, the camera wasn't moving, so we were able to try this HDR effect to bring that Motel lighting down a little bit. There was still plenty of dynamic range on the Monstro, so I didn't stress it, but I thought it'd be a thing worth testing out. So we'll see that in the final product and see how that comes out. But note that on these older Red cameras, I know I've made many videos over buying old Red cameras, and I still suggest people do it. They have the HDRX built into it. This isn't a new feature. This is something you can get from an old camera that costs less than $5,000 if you want. Monstro more than that, but like a Dragon or something can do the HDRX. So look into that if that's something you are curious about and you need that sort of feature for more of a low cost. We didn't add any green light to this one or anything. We just used that Motel neon sign, and you could see that we have plenty of light here. It's kissing the back of his head and separating him, which works really well because then we go into this close-up on the next shot. We were able to then shape this a little bit more. We brought in just a little, basically like an aperture MC, put it on the green hue and pushed it in on his right shoulder here, and then brought that tube light in a little bit more, and then the practicals were working in the background shooting into the street. Very simple, just trying to recreate kind of what was in that wide, but do it closer and have more control over it. Nothing too special here, just, this is what we're doing in narrative. We're trying to keep up with that consistency, keeping it real, while also making it look good and having control over the scene. All right, so we're gonna jump into some more setups, but before we do that, I do wanna thank the sponsor of this video, which is Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to present your work online. Start a completely personalized website with design intelligence from Squarespace. Design intelligence empowers anyone to build a beautiful, bespoke digital identity to use across your entire online presence. Maybe you want to start an online store to sell your photography or other products. Squarespace has the built-in functionality to get one of those up and running quickly. I've actually been using Squarespace to run my online stores for almost a decade now. And of course, if you're like me, you're probably looking to build a portfolio, which Squarespace has tons of features for that very thing. You can even create private galleries for client work using these tools. As you acquire work through your website, you can now collect payments using branded invoices, manage client info, feedback, and payment activity all in one place. So if you're looking for a home for your work, you can do that with Squarespace. Click the link in the description to get 10% off, and I want to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. And then we went into the motel, and the idea was to have some of that green neon coming through the window the whole time. To kind of spruce this up, make it softer, we put some muslin over the window rather than using the curtains that were already there, just to kind of help with this vibe and this kind of grungy vibe. And this is where the challenge begins now, right? We are using this green light as a key motivator. And then he also wanted some red light in some of these shots. So this first shot here, he opens the door. It's kind of our establishing shot. We've got a tube outside, I believe, kind of pushing more light on him, acting like the practicals that kind of create a silhouette. Nothing crazy. And then we have an aperture P300C with that green hue coming through the window. Nova is really good for something like this because it's already got a nice spread on it. So you can really just push it outside of a window and get a nice soft kind of fill going through something like that, rather than having to set up two different stands or a softbox or anything like that. It kind of just looks natural right out of the gate, and it's just one unit. easier and faster to set up. Dark room, but then it comes up to this phone. And so we're breaking one rule, we're using color. And now we're going to also make it look like this phone is ringing and like there's a red light on it. So we put that little kind of aperture MC, basically that little square light through some muzz, and we just kind of stuffed it over there on the phone and put it on this kind of blinking effect. So we got red light on the skin, but I wanted a little tungsten here, right? So we walked around the room when we get there, and this is how you should probably approach most things like this. Find the practicals you want to turn on, that you want to live on in the scene the whole time to kind of help find the shape. So we did we had a practical inside this closet area that we used as a motivator for some light for the rest of the scene here. So we've got the green light coming through the window, tungsten light over here in the closet. And so you can see when we rack to the phone here, we've got that red light on his skin, but we still have something to expose the skin that doesn't look like colored light. And it's front lit. Breaking the rules with the color, 2 different colors. I would generally not do that. And then we have some front lighting on this, but it looks nice and it makes sense for narrative to do some of this front lighting. You know, I could have taken a lot more time to try to shape it more backlighty, shooting more into the shadow side, but sometimes you just have to kind of accept what the scene is doing when it comes to narrative work. So then we're flipping sides and we're finally able to see some of this lighting more on a face and a proper close-up. And this is one of those things where I really was trying to push the bounds of what I normally do. I normally don't shoot like on a 75 in a room like that, or even shoot too wide in a room like that on a face. So you probably would stick to a 50. We talked about this in the last video. Probably on a 50, maybe go to a 35 if I need to for some dramatic reason, unless that's just the language of the whole film. Well, and so how this film is set up, we have multiple characters and we're showing multiple vignettes. So this one, it was like starting to make a decision. Do we change lenses and stay on a wider lens the whole time? Do we stay on a tighter lens the whole time? So we went to a 50 for this one, and this is kind of our gradual push going into a wide lens in a second. We're on the 50 here, and I started on the 75. I was like trying to compress it more, but then I was like, I'm breaking all my rules, and I started kind of getting my head about it. And this is where I was trying to find the balance with breaking the rules. So I was like, okay, we got to have some green, but I don't want to only light his face with the green. And we did have that tungsten behind him, right? So we do have our own B7C or a tube in there creating that tungsten light in the closet. And we thought, how about let's try to wrap that around, right? So we did this by using a 720B with a spotlight mount, and we hung some muslin on the wall. Like I said before, those walls were these really gross kind of yellow color, and we didn't want to use that as our bounce because that's really going to affect your skin tones. Use something that you have more control over and it's just more pleasant. So I believe we used an unbleached muslin for this, and we just kind of taped it up on the wall. And then we shot that spotlight mount into it, probably at like a 3200, 2700 Kelvin. Now it took us a while to find this point. We did this at first and it looked so good. We didn't have any of the green fill there. We had the 75 on and it looked nice, but it felt too far away. It felt too produced. And so we put that 50 on, got a little bit closer, actually got up on the bed because I was worried about that too. And I just had to hold the camera in an awkward way with the tripod on the bed. And then we cranked up that Nova to give a little bit of green fill. So this is a really good compromise. This was one of the first challenges here, was to still have that green acting as a main motivator of light, but still creating skin tones that don't suck, right? And so we've got the tungsten coming in and the green there, and I feel like this is a really good balance. I think it looks really nice. And then using Sir's Film Vision Pro, I think that's what I'm going to grade this film with, that film emulation. Shout out to Sir sending that over so I could test it. If you're looking for some good film emulation, check out Film Vision Pro. I'll have a link to it in the description below. I feel like this looks really nice. The skin tones really come through here, and that tungsten lighting looks really nice. So it's really fun. You can do that with a spotlight mount a lot. It's a really fun way of doing it. There's other ways. You could use a tube or something, bounce it off the wall, stick it out of frame. But with the spotlight mount, you're really able to widen and diffuse the light while still being able to really control it and bounce it off of things like this, because we couldn't really get a light over here in a way that made sense. Just do the old Roger Deakins Cove effect, put up some muzz and bounce some light into it. That's what we were channeling here. I think this shot turned out really nice. It was kind of this weird line flip, but I think it worked out, changing the focal lengths and everything. I think it's going to come out nice in the edit. So I'll show you a couple more frames here. I'm not going to break down all of these, but I think you'll get the idea. What we were trying to do is lean into this green effect as he falls asleep. And he's supposed to be kind of waking up in this sort of kind of fever dream, this kind of stuff that's going on in his head. And this is kind of the showing, the manifestation of that. So it was a matter of having a lot of green in the frame, a lot of that tungsten light in the frame, but we also wanted this kind of like heat lamp kind of effect, this red light in the bathroom. That the rules here, right? We're doing a lot of color lights. Try not to make it look too Christmassy while still having these color contrasts. Still motivating the light the best we can and making it look realistic, but still take you out of it. And it's not something you would actually have in a bathroom in a motel, right? All that red. And that's really easy. You just put in tube lights up in different spots. We have that Nova going through the window and we're changing the intensity on that when we need to. And then I've got a tube light just ready to go at any given point to move into a corner, bounce off a wall, or augment any way I need to. And then you sort of create this formula. Let's talk about that today instead of like the specific things I did for all of these. Let's talk about the approach. It's always about the overarching approach. So here we've got that tungsten light coming in. He's kind of laying on the bed, and we've got the green Nova, nothing crazy. Same thing for over the top. We quickly ended up switching to the 35 millimeters for the rest of it as he kind of goes to sleep, as things start to get weirder. That way we can get closer, we can open up the lens, and we can make it more surrealistic. And then we want to do this kind of effect where he's like, it's like from the mirror's point of view. So we put the 21 millimeter on the Monstro, opened it up, and kept that red light in the bathroom. And then the Nova in the background. You can see that here. It's just this really kind of strange effect where he's kind of in focus, but he's kind of going out of focus. I also switched to handheld for a lot of this. I don't shoot a lot of handheld. I really like a really nice composed tripod or dolly shot or a steady shot. And where this comes from is really, when you're talking about indie short films that might end up in a film festival or something like that, and you think about your role as a cinematographer, what can I do to elevate the film? And step one to me really is like, I've been doing this a long time, I've seen a lot of these short films, and it's like, how do we make it look like it didn't cost no money to make? How do we make it look like it costs $1 million to make, right? And that's by bringing this level of intention, shooting it on a tripod, not shooting it handheld Dogma 95. If you don't know what Dogma 95 is, maybe my age is showing, but look it up. It's a really interesting idea. But just shooting it handheld, with natural light and showing off, it's like showing off the budget. So how do we trick people into thinking that it's much more elevated in that way than it is? And that's usually why I'm static. That's usually why I'm doing controlled moves, well-composed frames, gimbal moves. But in this one, it's like, let's go freeform. Let's make it actually help the story in this way. So 35 millimeter after this, and a handheld after this. Long takes too. Put that 35 on, and then it's me and the camera, maybe with my bebop, which is kind of like a shoot sack, or an Apple box to support me, but I'm doing my best to do it handheld with intention, but still having this like organic, visceral look to it. So what the director kind of wanted was like this green wash, which my cinematographer brain goes, wash? Green? That's scary. How do we make that look good? So what we did is we put some muslin, bleached muslin at this point, just kind of on the ground, on the floor, and then we put a couple tube lights on the green hue. So depending on the shot, we would bounce that into the muslin, or we would put it under the muslin, or bounce it off the wall, let the muslin do some kind of, some bounce back. And we're like, what if the light kind of feels like it's coming from the ground? And the director really liked this idea that the light maybe is coming from a place that doesn't make sense. So the light's coming from the ground instead of coming from overheads. And then it was just a matter of like adjusting that depending on what we were shooting. Just leaned into that the rest of the shoot. We took away the tungsten light in the closet, and now we were just rocking that kind of green look. It started to feel like The Matrix. I started comparing it to The Matrix. I'm like, well, The Matrix has a green wash. Their skin is still there. The film is still creating some nice tones. So that's why I'm using the Film Vision Pro color grade, power grade for this, because I think that'll really help enrich the skin. And there's some more front lighting in here. I would not front light often, but you can see how this kind of brings us back to the 1999 The Matrix here. Like this is a good shot here. We have adding another character to the mix. We got the green light coming through the window, but we have this little tube on the ground shooting through some muslin, and it's uplighting him, which is kind of interesting. And he's got a nice little catch light from a tube or a mirror off in the distance. There's still plenty of shape. What he's wearing is helping with the shape. Where the light is coming from, it's still a little bit upstage. It's not totally front side on the camera, right? It's a little bit upstage, so it's kind of glistening, and it's coming from the bottom, so he's actually getting shape like on the top. He doesn't have any light source on the top, just a little bit of fill light. I think this looks kind of nice. It's something I would never do. So breaking the rules here is kind of fun because now I got something that I think looks pretty nice, and it's not how I would ever do something before. So it's just this kind of fun experimental game that we're playing here. And then we got this kind of 2 shot. This was like a really long handheld shot we were doing on that 35 millimeter now, really, showing off a lot of the room. The light's a little harsher. You can see a little bit of that shadow on his neck on this 2 shot, because we have a tube light over in the corner, and then we've got one on the ground. So this is kind of uplighting, this kind of, where are these lights coming from? It doesn't really matter. It's just trying to give directionality with that green effect. As a cinematographer, you're trying to create something that looks good and still falls in line with what the director wants and the story, right? And as a cinematographer, it's your job to challenge the director, challenge them on what they're wanting, but also trying to give them something that does work, right? Trying to find this collaborative compromise. And that's what we were doing here. I mean, like I said, I wouldn't initially have been like, yeah, green light, but we did this. And I think we created something really interesting in the end. All right. And I think for the last setup here, this is actually really kind of funny, because we were trying to create, now we're trying to pull ourselves out of the surrealism, wake him up. I did stay on the 35 millimeter, which I kind of regret a little bit, but I think it helps us transition a little better. But we wanted this like morning look. And it was actually 4:28 in the morning when we did shoot this. And it's like, we could wait a few more hours, or we can just do this ourselves. But it was really simple, actually. And let's talk a little bit about how to sell the daylight effect, and especially when you're not actually shooting in daylight. So here's a couple tricks. First off, you need your light source. You need your daylight. So that Nova that was outside the whole time, we just changed to the daylight setting. Maybe a little bit more warm, maybe 6,000 or something like that. Crank that up, push it through the window. There's your light source. But when you do that, you'll find that it does not look natural yet. Something will still be off about it. And that's because the sun, compared to your eyes and how much dynamic range your eyes can handle, is the sun is really, really direct, big, and bright. So to create a kind of slash in the room, rather than using the spotlight mount or anything, we just lifted that muslin until it kind of cut the light and created a shadow across the wall that you can see here. And then you want it to really like hit your subject to show the intensity of the light. So it's really just hitting him on the back. And then it's a matter of creating some sort of return. If it's that bright and we're in white walls, basically, there would be a lot of return back on his face, which will be good because it'll help us create some shape on the far side of his face. But we're doing this at night. There is no real sun. We're not even using that big of a source. We're using the Nova. So we put a tube light in the corner and the same color temperature and bounce it off the wall as if there's light returning off the wall. I think that really works here, while keeping quite a bit of shadow on the downside of his face, creating that it's harsh. There's a shadow coming across his neck. It's a harsh-ish light. The sun is big, but it is direct. And then the main trick to really selling sun, in my opinion, is a little bit of fill light. I think it's one thing to think that the sun is a direct path, so you're going to have a single source and it's going to bounce off of one spot, but it's so bright, it's going to bounce all over that room. So when shooting at night and you don't actually have the sun, you need to create your own fill light. So in this scenario, we had all the tube lights out already. So we put another tube light just up on this little vanity or dresser or table or something. And we had the pool noodle on it, the P007 diffused, and I bounced that back and I just turned it way down, but enough to have a little bit of fill on the front side, acting like there's light spilling all over this room. Maybe coming through some other windows, which weren't there, but you don't know. Your eye is tricking you, right? You're trying to tell your eye that the sun is all over the place. Not ideal conditions, really. You don't want light bouncing all over the place, but in a narrative scene, you're trying to sell a look and create a reality. This is when you have to kind of lean into what happens in reality, right? So there's actually 3 light sources. It's the Nova and a tube in the corner, and then the tube as a fill on the vanity side. And to me, I think it really sells. It really looks like morning daylight coming in there, maybe even afternoon. What time of day? How long did he sleep, right? And these are things that are going to matter to the story, which you can see eventually when this film comes out. Yeah, so this was a fun one. Breaking all my own rules and trying something different. Shooting wider, shooting wide open, shooting with color, front lighting a little bit, it was a fun experiment, and I suggest that everyone else try that every once in a while. You're going to create these beliefs and these rules in your head, but then break them. And then it kind of reminds you also what you like about your rules, right? So there's certain things on this night where I was like, well, there's a reason I usually have that rule, right? And then that one doesn't need to be so strict, and depending on the scenario that you're in. And this also goes back to each project is different. Each project has different needs, and it's your goal to try to meet those needs. All right, well, that was a quick breakdown of this short film. Shooting my own short film coming up in the next couple of weeks, so we'll be breaking down that one next month, so stay tuned for that. And as always, I'm Citra Sakurai. See ya.